Welcome back. Throughout this playlist, we've been working towards conducting semi-structured interviews. In this last video, we'll talk about actually conducting an interview. How you conduct your interviews will impact the data you get for your projects. It'll also impact how enjoyable a time you have talking with the participants. Let's begin by talking about how you get set up for your interview. By the time you're ready to conduct a research interview, you'll have your interview guide and research protocol finalized. You will have recruited a participant, and you'll have an agreed time and place to meet to conduct the interview. In most cases, you'll have your research protocol approved by the appropriate research ethics board and have any other required institutional approvals in place. The ethics board will most likely require that you have a consent form for participants in your project. A consent form is a document that details the conditions under which a participant agrees to be involved in a research project. In signing a consent form, the participant agrees that they understand and agree to these conditions. You can conduct a semi-structured interview either in person, over the phone, or using a virtual or web-based platform like FaceTime, MS Teams, WebEx, or Zoom. The type of interview you choose will impact both how you prepare and conduct the interview. Perhaps the most important factor in selecting the type of interview should be the convenience and comfort for the participant. The more convenient a location is, the more likely a participant will participate. With that said, in-person interviews can allow for a more social connection and maybe allow you to create a better rapport with participants. For our example project, we used both in-person and telephone interviews, with the selection based mostly on where the participants were located. For the rest of this video, I'm going to focus on how we conducted our in-person interviews. Some of the directions may need to be adjusted a little when using another approach. You'll need to adjust your interviewing technique depending on who you're interviewing. For example, you would not conduct an interview with a child the same way you would with an adult. Other groups of participants may need other accommodations, changes in tone, or supports. For the example I'm presenting, I was interviewing an adult healthcare provider about their experience directly related to a part of their job. For in-person interviews, you should consider the best place to conduct the interviews. Many of the in-person interviews for our example project were conducted in a meeting room within the provider's clinic space or in the hospital. Make sure you have copies of your consent form, as you'll need to complete this before the start of the interview. It's good to review your interview guide, either silently or out loud, before you meet the participant. If you can mostly remember your interview guide, you can avoid constantly pausing to check and read each question. As part of your research protocol, you'll need to decide how you're going to capture the data from the interview. Options commonly used include notes written by the researcher, digital voice recorders, smartphones, and web-based or virtual platforms. For our example project, we took some research notes after each interview, but we primarily relied on a digital recorder to record the interviews. While we only used one recorder, some people advise using a second backup recorder to ensure the interview is captured. You should test your recording method before each interview to ensure there are no technical issues. If using a digital recorder, bring an extra set of batteries. If using a smartphone, ensure that it's sufficiently charged and that there's enough free memory to record the full interview. If meeting in person, try to arrive early and get comfortable with the space. If using a virtual platform, log in early and test the setup. The more relaxed and prepared you are, the more relaxed your participant will be, and the more professional you'll appear. If you have time, you can start the meeting with some casual conversation to build a connection with the participant. You can then introduce the project and discuss why you're conducting it. Review your consent form with the participant. Answer any questions they may have about the form or your study. As part of your introduction, you should let the participants know about why you're conducting the study, what you plan to do with their interview data, and the potential impacts of your project. As part of your introduction, you should also let participants know that they are free to stop the interview at any point, they can choose not to answer any questions that they want, and you'll maintain their confidentiality. These conditions may be discussed when you review the consent form. After the consent form is signed, you can ask the participant whether it's all right to start recording. Once they agree, you can start recording the interview. If you want, you can record a little preamble when you first start recording. For example, welcoming the person or saying that this interview is for a particular study. Other researchers may start the recording by saying the date and the study number assigned to the interview. For example, they may start by saying, "Today is November 28th, and this is interview number 5 for our diabetes transition study." When the moment feels right to you, you can then ask your first question, which would usually be the first question on your interview guide. An interview is a type of conversation. As with other conversations, they can vary in tone. In trying to set a tone for your interviews, be mindful of the context of the interview, who you're interviewing, your topic, and your research objectives. I would describe my tone for this example interview as a sympathetic journalist, clearly wanting to listen to the person and hear what they had to say, but with a clear focus on addressing the research objectives, particularly related to describing the process of transition. There are a lot of resources and tips on how to conduct an interview. Suggestions include to try to build rapport with participants, be flexible, avoid leading questions, do not cut off participants while they're talking or in the middle of a pause, and make sure that your participant feels heard. A lot of these good practices reflect how you'd behave when having an attentive and respectful conversation with someone. For semi-structured interviews, it is not just about reading through your interview guide. You need to be engaged, to listen, and reflect. Be confident and curious. Ask questions you want to explore based on how the conversation is going. Remember that the strength of semi-structured interviews is that they allow for questions generated during the interview. Unless there are questions generated during the interview, and you just read through the questions on your interview guide, you would not really have conducted a semi-structured interview, even if that's what you plan to do. Follow-up questions, or probes, are one way to help ensure that participants give richer answers. If a topic is not covered in a response to a question, you can specifically ask about those details. Another characteristic that should be considered is the relevance of the data. Relevance is dependent on the perspective of the researcher related to a particular research project. A person can provide a rich response, but if it does not add to furthering one's understanding of a topic, it can be of modest value to a project. There's also a temporal aspect to relevance. What may be useful or novel information when conducting the first few interviews may be less relevant or interesting to a researcher later. You should also check occasionally to make sure your recording device is still recording. There's nothing worse than completing a valuable interview only to find out that you never recorded at all. Once you've asked your final question, you can let the participant know that you have no further interview questions. Thank the person for their time and inform them of any follow-up that you intend. For example, you may tell them that a copy of the project report will be sent to them. You can then stop recording. After the interview, find a place to reflect on what you heard. Write any notes you want to about the interview. You can include comments or details about the interview that may not be reflected in your audio recording. Now that you've completed the interview, you need a plan for what you're going to do with the data. Treat each audio file as private information. You should also try and ensure that you maintain control over all copies of this audio file. For our example project, after each interview, I removed the file from the audio recorder and put it on a password-protected computer. This computer was backed up regularly to a university computer server, which kept the backups within the university computer network as opposed to backing up files to a third-party cloud service. Do not use participants' names when labeling the audio files. You can name the audio files by using an interview code, for example, interview 001. If you have a lot of audio files, you can keep and store separately a document which matches the interview codes to the participants' names. Interviewing is a skill that you'll get better at the more you do. There are a lot of books, articles, and other resources you can review to become a better interviewer. A good practice is to listen to the recording of your own interviews to assess your interviewing performance and identify issues you want to improve on. You can also watch other interviewers, their tips or techniques you can adopt to your own interviewing style. There you have it. That's how we created qualitative data using a semi-structured interview. Thanks for watching the entire playlist. Hopefully you feel better prepared now to complete your own research interviews. Best of luck with your research.